Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Red Dog Projections. I'm Lucas, and I have Eric here as always.
Hey guys.
And today we'll be discussing the 2022 Oregon governor election, which is a very interesting election because you wouldn't expect us to be discussing such a blue-leaning state, but we'll get into that later. And with that being said, let's get right into it. So first, let's give a little bit of a background here because you might be confused on as to why we're covering a governor election in Oregon. Oregon obviously is a pretty deep blue state, having voted for the Democratic candidate for a very long time, and it voted for Biden by over 15 points in 2020. The thing is, what makes this race very special is the fact that an independent candidate is running named Betsy Johnson, and she is actually a former Democratic state senator. So she might be splitting some votes from the Democratic candidate, Tina Kotek. Furthermore, what complicates the scenario even more is the current governor, Kate Brown, who is currently term limited, is the most unpopular governor in the nation, and she is a Democrat. That might also reflect poorly on the Democratic candidate of Tina Kotek, which Eric will be discussing now.
Yep. So Tina Kotek is currently a state politician there in Oregon. She did serve as the Speaker of the House of Representatives there, and she's currently the nominee for the governor race. She won in about like 20 points in the primary, so she was picked pretty decisively. But that's not where the competitiveness is, as Lucas explained.
Yep.
She worked in a lot of within the state kind of help out groups. She's worked for a food bank, kind of get their children up on their feet type of business. So she's done a lot of like activist type of things within the state of Oregon. And with her experience as being the House of Representatives, she does seem like a pretty ideal candidate for the state of Oregon. But as Lucas will explain, she is up against not one, but two candidates, but the Republican candidate being Christine Drazan.
I guess I'll also add some of her campaign strategies this election. A lot of the ads that she's running, just like many other Democratic candidates, have been about abortion rights because it seemed to be a popular issue that Democrats have been running on to defeat Republicans. This is what happened in the New York 19 special election where Pat Ryan defeated Mark Molinaro by running on this idea of abortion rights. So could that be enough to win? We'll see. The Republican candidate is Christine Drazan, who is currently or formerly the minority leader of the state, so also a pretty big, well-known name. She's running on a platform mainly on the economy, I think, namely inflation, as many Republicans are running on, and also crime, which also is another topic that many Republicans are running on. Uh, we have seen, for example, Portland being brought up a lot in such ads and trying to reflect poorly on the Democratic nominee.
And may I add too that a key endorsement that Christine Drazan got is Nike CEO Phil Knight. He is one of the biggest, if not the biggest industry there. He is the CEO of Nike. I don't think he was anymore, but he has been the CEO for Nike for like 40 years. And he is very heavily based in Oregon. And he is a very key influential donor because he's very, very wealthy. And I'm sure he gave a lot of money to Christine Drazan. He, I think, believes that Oregon has gone too much to the left and that a new type of, yeah, a new face in the Oregon governorship is needed, which is why he's pouring so much money into Christine Drazan's campaign. And that does carry a lot of influence within the state.
Yep, that's a good point. I completely agree with that. Now let's head to the interesting candidate here, the independent candidate named Betsy Johnson. She is pretty well known in the state as well for being a state senator. Usually, you don't really see former elected officials running independent campaigns for for a bigger office. Betsy Johnson, in this case, is running as an independent, and as many people have speculated, and as we'll show you later, as the polls have shown, she has been taking votes away from the Democratic candidate in what should have been an easy win for Tina Kotek. Betsy Johnson is actually making it quite a challenge for her to win, because her appeal to that Democratic base that might feel disconnected from Tina Kotek or those independent voters who went for Joe Biden and were going to go for Kotek, but they like this more middle of the road candidate better. So that's Betsy Johnson. Now, taking a look at endorsements, I'll quickly go through some of the important ones here. Perhaps the most interesting one is Kurt Schrader, who endorsed Betsy Johnson. Kurt Schrader was the representative in Oregon and is a Democrat. So he actually lost his primary to a pretty progressive Democratic candidate in who ran this year. I believe her name was McElloyd Skinner, Jamie McElloyd Skinner. So Kurt Schrader might have actually been kind of upset about that and decided to buck the Democratic Party in this case and endorse Betsy Johnson. So we'll see if that actually carries any weight, because Kurt Schrader lost in a pretty big upset because people thought that he was really going to win. So maybe some of those people who might not be happy with status quo right now might actually go for Betsy Johnson. I'm gonna give it over to Eric now, who's gonna be discussing the polling data that we've seen right now.
Right.
At
And
538.
all right. It's pretty inconclusive. Um, right now the polls show that Drazen is up by 0.6 again. This such a small lead is so variable, especially in a traditionally Democratic state. There's a lot going on because there's a lot to consider. It's a traditionally Democratic state, but there's a third party candidate, but the Democrats are campaigning on abortion and national rights, but the previous Democratic governor is the most unpopular one in the state. So there's just so much to factor in and then weigh on in terms of what is the most to consider and what is the least to consider. And if you go back, I don't know if it had it on the other website, but every like traditional pollster has this race as toss-up because it's so hard to predict. It's really hard to tell if Kotek will squeeze out a win against Drazen because we really don't know how many independent voters are going to come out for Johnson. And on top of the fact that independent voters will come out, more Republican voters may also come out because they actually see a chance that a Republican can win. So they can just tell, whoever neighbor that they have, because outside of Portland, there are a lot of like Republican areas in Oregon. They're just sparsely populated, but there are quite a few of them outside of the cities. So they can very easily come out and tip this election because it's not going to take that many votes with a third party candidate.
Interesting point. I do also want to point out though that it does look like Kotek is gaining a little bit compared to before. Now that Betsy Johnson's numbers are dropping a little bit, which was to be expected as more people decided who to vote for, Kotek is gaining a little bit more ground. So this does lead us now to our final prediction. We do have this as toss-up right now. I actually think this might be tilt Kotek because recently the race has been more and more nationalized about this idea of abortion. And as the race became more nationalized, we saw this gaining of Tina Kotek. From that, I feel like Kotek might be able to draw enough of a win over simply because she's the Democrat here and because of how Democratic Oregon is. Eric, what do you think?
I'll probably have to agree on that. Again, nothing is for certain in such a close race because I don't know how many times I'm going to be able to say it, but there's just a lot going on, and it's really hard to pinpoint what is what and like what is going to lean for who. I do like your point though about the nationalization of this race. This race was like broadcasted on every news network and every social media race because like it as we said in the beginning of the video, it's kind of ridiculous how such a traditional Democratic state can have a Republican governor since like 40 years. So I'm probably going to have to agree that because it got so popular, it could that could be the help that Kotek needs to take this race. We saw this with abortion rights. As soon as Roe v. Wade was overturned, everyone took out to the streets and everyone in retaliation started protesting. So the publicity I think will tip it over for Kotek. But even if it's a win for her, this is not a very usual sighting in the state of Oregon.
I agree completely, and I think it's interesting that like even on like Snapchat, like this was being talked about. What is that? What is that one place called?
Good luck, America.
Yes, Good Luck America. Yes, I saw this on Good Luck America. I thought that was really funny. But yes, this is a very, very close race. But we do think Tina Kotek will pull this out. And that marks the end of the video for today. Thank you all so much for watching. If you like this episode, please hit like button. If you like our content, please subscribe. We'll see you in our next episode tomorrow.
See ya.